September 12th, 1958, 11:47 p.m. The traitor's hand was shaking as he wrapped his fingers around the pistol grip beneath his jacket. $50,000. That was the price quietly agreed upon by the Italian families for Bumpy Johnson's head. It was a number large enough to change a life and dangerous enough to end one. The man holding the gun had been standing behind Bumpy Johnson for years. He had walked into rooms with him, watched his back, and earned a level of trust that could not be faked. Tonight, he was no longer a protector. He was the plan. Lennox Lounge was crowded in the familiar way it always was on a Friday night. Cigarette smoke hung heavy in the air, glasses clinked against tables, and the jazz band played steadily, unaware that time had narrowed to a single moment unfolding behind them. Bumpy Johnson sat at his usual corner table, his fedora resting beside an untouched glass, his back turned to the room with the quiet confidence of a man who had nothing to prove. He was deep in conversation with two men whose influence extended far beyond Harlem, speaking calmly, comfortably, as if nothing in the world could interrupt the rhythm of the night. 6 steps behind him, the traitor waited. The instructions had been clear. Walk in like any other night, stay close, wait until Bumpy was distracted, raise the gun and pull the trigger once, no hesitation, no second shot. Then disappear into the crowd and into a future already prepared. Everything depended on that one moment. Everything depended on the sound the room was about to hear. The traitor moved closer, close enough that no one noticed. He was always near Bumpy. That was his role. His presence was expected, routine, invisible. When he stopped behind the chair, the distance was perfect. The angle was perfect. The gun was already chambered. He aimed at the back of Bumpy Johnson's head and pulled the trigger. The room froze, not because of a gunshot, but because there was none. A sharp, mechanical click echoed through Lennox Lounge, cutting through the music like a blade. The band stopped mid-note. Conversations collapsed into silence. Chairs scraped softly as people turned, trying to understand what they had just heard. 300 people stared at the same moment, watching a man stand with a useless gun in his hand, and another man remain seated, calm and unmoved. Bumpy Johnson did not turn around. He did not reach for a weapon. He did not flinch. He did not raise his voice or tense his shoulders. Instead, he lifted his glass, took a slow sip, and set it back on the table as if nothing at all had happened. Only then did he turn his head, just enough to look directly at the man behind him. "I've been waiting on you," Bumpy said quietly. In that instant, the traitor understood the truth. This was not bad luck. This was not a jammed weapon or a failed plan. Bumpy Johnson had known. He had known who would pull the gun. He had known when it would happen. And he had allowed it. What no one in that room knew yet was that Bumpy Johnson had been preparing for this night for weeks. He had known the Italians were desperate. He had known they were running out of options. And he had known that when powerful men cannot move you directly, they try to break you from the inside. By the late 1950s, Bumpy Johnson was no longer simply a gangster operating in Harlem. He was the man who kept the neighborhood from being carved apart by outside interests. The numbers racket, the clubs, the landlords, and the politicians all flowed through him, whether they admitted it or not. He did not rule through chaos. He ruled through order, through the quiet understanding that things functioned better when he was in control. That was exactly why the Italian families could not tolerate him. For years, they had tried everything. They sent enforcers who left Harlem battered or humiliated. They attempted negotiations dressed up as partnerships, offering respect that came with strings attached. Bumpy refused every time. Harlem was not for sale, and he made sure they understood that. When money failed and intimidation failed, only one option remained. If you could not remove Bumpy Johnson from Harlem, you removed Bumpy Johnson entirely. But killing him required someone close enough to bypass his defenses, someone trusted, someone desperate. The traitor had been struggling long before the offer came. The problems were quiet but relentless, bills that piled up faster than his income, family pressures he did not speak about, the growing realization that loyalty did not guarantee security forever. When the approach finally happened, it did not feel sudden. It felt inevitable. The first meeting was deliberately ordinary. A black sedan pulled to the curb. A familiar face sat in the back seat. The conversation stayed casual, friendly, almost sympathetic. They spoke about the business, about how dangerous it was to stay loyal to one man when so many others wanted him gone. They spoke about the future and how quickly it could disappear if the wrong decision was made. Then the briefcase appeared. It was opened just enough to make the message clear. Neatly stacked bills, clean and untouched, more money than the traitor had ever held in his life. $50,000, offered without paperwork, without witnesses, without delay. Enough to erase problems that had been weighing on him for months. The terms were simple. One moment, one pull of the trigger. After that, everything changed. New identities, a new city, a life free from fear and obligation. When hesitation crept in, the tone shifted. The conversation turned toward consequences, toward how families suffer when men refuse to be practical, toward how accidents happen when powerful people are ignored. By the time the car door closed, the decision had already begun to form. What the traitor did not know was that before that meeting ever ended, Bumpy Johnson already had eyes on him. Bumpy survived not by trusting blindly, but by understanding people. He paid attention to movements others dismissed, a car parked too long, a conversation that stopped abruptly, a familiar face seen where it did not belong. When word reached him, Bumpy did not react emotionally. He did not confront anyone. He simply watched. Over the following weeks, the signs confirmed his suspicions. The traitor's behavior changed in subtle ways. His confidence gave way to tension. His loyalty became strained. Bumpy noticed everything. He always did. At any point, Bumpy could have ended it quietly. One phone call and the problem would disappear. That was how other men handled betrayal. But Bumpy Johnson understood that killing a man did not stop the message behind him. It only delayed it. So Bumpy made a different choice. He decided to let the betrayal reveal itself. He decided to turn the attempt into a lesson. And when the gun was pulled inside Lennox Lounge and the room froze in silence, Bumpy Johnson made sure everyone understood exactly who was still in control. Bumpy Johnson understood that the most important part of power was not how it was taken, but how it was displayed. Killing the traitor before the attempt would have solved a short-term problem, but it would have created a long-term one. Another man would have been tempted. Another offer would have been made. The Italians would have learned nothing except that they needed to be more careful next time. What Bumpy wanted was something more permanent. He wanted a moment that could not be denied, a lesson that would spread without him ever needing to repeat it. Once he was certain the betrayal was real, Bumpy began to prepare quietly. He contacted a gunsmith he had trusted for years, a man who understood that questions were dangerous and discretion was valuable. Bumpy explained exactly what he needed, not a damaged weapon, but a convincing one. A gun that felt right in the hand, that carried the correct weight and balance that would pass inspection by anyone who handled it casually. A gun that would betray its owner only at the precise moment he believed he had succeeded. The gunsmith delivered within days. The weapon was flawless on the outside and useless where it mattered. Bumpy inspected it carefully, nodded once, and paid without comment. The next step required patience. Bumpy needed the swap to happen without suspicion. He waited for an errand that would take the traitor across town, something routine enough not to raise concern. When the apartment was empty, Bumpy and one trusted associate entered quietly, found the gun where they knew it would be, and made the exchange. Nothing else was touched, nothing else needed to be. From that point forward, Bumpy simply waited. He allowed the Italians to believe their plan was unfolding perfectly. He allowed the traitor's anxiety to grow, knowing that guilt and fear would keep him committed. The longer the wait, the more confident everyone involved became. Confidence, Bumpy knew, was often the final mistake. When September 12th arrived, Bumpy followed his routine exactly. He went to Lennox Lounge. He took his usual seat. He spoke to the same people. He made no effort to change his behavior or increase security. To an observer, it looked careless. To Bumpy, it was necessary. The lesson only worked if the room believed the threat had been real. When the gun clicked and the room froze, Bumpy let the silence stretch. He wanted every person present to feel the weight of what had just happened. He wanted the traitor to understand, without explanation, that the outcome had been decided long before that moment. When he finally spoke, it was not to shame the man loudly or invite chaos. It was to establish control beyond any doubt. Bumpy stood slowly, deliberately, and turned fully toward the traitor. He did not raise his voice. He did not threaten him. He simply spoke the truth. He explained that he knew about the money. He knew about the offer. He knew about the fear that had been applied and the pressure that had followed. He explained that the Italians believed loyalty could be purchased the same way everything else was purchased. That belief, he said, was their mistake. He produced an envelope and placed it on the table between them. Inside were paid bills, settled accounts, and proof that the problems used to pressure the traitor no longer existed. The gesture was not mercy. It was exposure. It demonstrated that the betrayal had never been necessary, only tempting. Bumpy told the man that he would leave Harlem that night. He would take his family and disappear. He would not return. He would not speak of what happened unless spoken to. If he broke those conditions, there would be no second demonstration, no lesson, and no audience. The traitor understood immediately that this was not a negotiation. Then Bumpy gave him one final instruction. When the Italians asked what happened, he was to tell them exactly what he saw. He was to tell them that Bumpy Johnson had known. He was to tell them that the gun had been allowed into the room, and he was to tell them that Harlem was not for sale. The traitor lowered the useless weapon to the floor, nodded once, and left without another word. By morning, he would be gone from New York entirely. No one in the room followed him. No one needed to. His punishment had already been delivered. After the door closed, Bumpy turned to the crowd. 300 people watched him in silence. He reminded them calmly that Harlem belonged to its people, not to outsiders who believed money could divide them. He raised his glass in a quiet toast. Slowly, others followed. The band resumed playing. Conversations returned. Within minutes, the lounge looked exactly as it had before, but everyone knew something fundamental had changed. Word spread quickly. By the next morning, men from Boston to Baltimore were repeating the story. A traitor had pulled a gun on Bumpy Johnson. The gun had failed. The man had lived. And the Italians had been humiliated without a single shot being fired. Emergency meetings followed. Some demanded retaliation. Others recognized the reality. Every move against Bumpy Johnson had already been anticipated. Continuing the fight would only cost more money and more men. The decision was made quietly and without ceremony. Harlem would be left alone. Bumpy Johnson lived for years after that night, not because he avoided danger, but because he understood it better than anyone else. He did not rely on fear alone. He relied on foresight. The lesson delivered at Lennox Lounge became part of Harlem's memory, passed down as an example of what real power looked like. The most dangerous weapon that night was not the gun that failed to fire. It was the knowledge Bumpy Johnson already possessed. He did not react to threats. He absorbed them, reshaped them, and turned them into warnings. And that was why, long after the music faded and the smoke cleared, his name still carried weight. Because in Harlem, respect was not given. It was earned. And on September 12th, 1958, Bumpy Johnson earned it once again.